So I want to really quickly introduce ourselves and then maybe just get an idea of who we have here. So I am not Britton Barker, as it says on the slides, but she put these together. So I left that up there to give her credit for these slides. I am Sarah Leopold. I am faculty in the audiology division of COMD. I got my PhD and my bachelor's degree at Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. And my research is in the area of speech perception, specifically the impact of hearing impairment on understanding speech in noisy environments. So that's what I do.
Okay, and I'm Ron Gillum, and I'm a professor here in the speech pathology side. I got my PhD from Indiana University, my bachelor's and master's from Colorado State. I primarily study information processing in children with language impairments.
Great. And just because I'm curious who we have here today, I recognize most of you. Undergraduates. Okay, and you guys are primarily what year?
Seniors.
Primarily seniors, and then we have a couple grad students. Yes? Yeah. Okay, all right, good. So you are all here because presumably you care a little bit at least about what a PhD in COMD looks like and what you can do with it, right? So we're going to talk about those things today, and then we're going to take a little bit of time and talk specifically about what the PhD at Utah State looks like and how you would go about completing that degree here. But first I want to talk to you guys about just generally, what is a PhD, right? Just what is it? It's, I think we all get a lot more information through our undergraduate degrees about what it's like to be a clinical student, right? An MA, an SLP, or a doctorate of audiology. We know kind of what those programs look like. But the PhD in COMD is a lot more vague for most people. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, we just don't talk about it as much. But two, because it is a little bit more vague. And we're going to talk about some of that, why that is, and what that means today. Okay. So first, just what is it? So the PhD is short for Doctor of Philosophy. It's a very old degree, been around for a long time. It's globally recognized as the postgraduate degree given by universities as the research degree. Okay, somebody who has done a dissertation, which is original research, and submitted it either to the university or hopefully for publication. So you've completed original research. And the PhD allows you generally to do academic or a research career. So maybe be a university professor like the two of us. The structure of it varies a lot, okay? So it's incredibly individualized. It really depends on what you're interested in, what your mentor does, what field you're in, and what you want your ultimate kind of career to be. So the structure of it is going to vary a lot depending on the university that you're at, the field that you're in, your interest, all of that. And we'll talk about some of that today. Some people finish in 3 years, some in 5. You could be like me and finish in 7. Don't be like me. Oh yeah? Hey! Okay, see? I don't feel so bad. But really, it's you. The whole time, you are kind of guiding your own path and kind of forging your own program in a lot of ways. There is some structure to it, and there's definitely some structure to the program here at USU, but in some places, like in my program, there was really no structure. I picked the classes I took, I picked my schedule, you know, I chose what I was doing on a daily basis. So the PhD, you know, when I said earlier that it's kind of vague, it's for those reasons, right? It's not nearly as structured as the clinical programs. When you decide to enter into a PhD program, it's very different than when you decide to enter into, say, an undergraduate program or a clinical program. When you pick a place to do your PhD, it's much less about the university or the program, much, much more about the mentor. So the PhD is a really kind of one-on-one mentorship. You and your PhD advisor tend to have a very strong relationship. Hopefully it's a good relationship because it's a really close one. So when you're picking kind of what you want to do for your PhD and where you want to go, think less about geographic region, right? You know, if you want to stay in the West, that's great. But if there's no correct mentor, no appropriate mentor for you in the West, you might have to move somewhere else, okay? So it's you need a little bit of flexibility. But the thing you most want to think about is, this needs to be a good working relationship, because everything that you're going to learn, how to run a lab, how to do your research, how to mentor students, that's all going to come from your mentor. Now, there is a committee typically, and you've got, it's not a completely one-on-one thing. You've got other people helping you, but your mentor is the most important thing. You want to become an expert in a particular field, right? And that doesn't just mean I want to be an expert in speech pathology. I want to be an expert in audiology. You have to have an area of research. What is the thing that drives you? For me, it's understanding why people with hearing loss have difficulties understanding speech and noise. That's a very specific topic. So when I went and picked a mentor, I made sure that the person who I worked with did something related to speech understanding and people with hearing loss, right? Okay. So the mentorship is very important. Becoming a scholar, becoming a person who has a PhD and goes out and gets a job and is successful is complicated, right? So you've got the thing I was just talking about a minute ago, where you are becoming an expert in a particular area, right? You're getting that specialized knowledge of your particular topic. But it's not just that. There's a lot more to it. So things like how to mentor students. That doesn't just come naturally, typically. That's really something that you learn. Things like accounting, up here, accounting, engineering, conflict resolution. I have to manage my own lab budget. That means that I have to know a little bit, at least, about accounting, right? I have to know how to make sure that at the end of the day, the cash matches up with what it says it is. Engineering, I work with a lot of acoustical equipment. I work with a lot of pretty complicated equipment, which means that I need to know how to troubleshoot that stuff. Nicole, who works in my lab, is going, uh-huh. I have to know how to troubleshoot that. So there's a little bit of engineering involved sometimes. Conflict resolution, absolutely. So you learn these things during your PhD program. Everything that I learned about running a lab, about managing, grants, managing research projects, that all came from my time in an active research lab during my PhD program, all right? And you really form your professional identity during your PhD education. So you really form who you are as both a scholar and a mentor and all of those things during your PhD education. So it's no longer just about learning the material, right? Going to classes and learning the material. Questions on that before we move on? And anything I've said so far? Okay. All right, so this is information that just came out a couple days ago, actually. ASHA just put this information out for the 2015-2016 academic year. Basically, the question was, when are people enrolling in COMD PhD programs? So where are they in their academic careers or their professional careers? And so the results of the survey said that about 42% of students who are getting PhDs in audiology, so that's not the clinical degree, that's the PhD in audiology, enroll while they're also doing the AUD. So that means that they're doing like a dual PhD AUD simultaneous program. So about half of these students are doing that. They don't already have the AUD and are coming back, they're getting them at the same time. For SLP, it's a little bit different, but similar. So 23% enrolled immediately after receiving their master's degree. Okay, so they went straight from the master's in SLP to their PhD. And then 35% enrolled after practicing for just a few years. So most people are either doing it as soon as they get their degree or after just a few years of being out and practicing. Meaning that most people are not going back after 10, 15 years in the field. And then 41% of people who are getting a PhD in speech and hearing sciences. So that means that it's not really a clinical-based research PhD. It's a PhD in, say, basic hearing science or basic speech science. They are doing it immediately after they receive their bachelor's degree, so about 41%. That's actually what I did. That's also what Dr. Barker on the audiology faculty did. She took a little bit of time, but she did not get a clinical degree. This is if you know you don't want to work clinically. I knew that. I knew I didn't want to be a clinician, right? I knew I wanted to be a researcher and not work clinically. And so I went directly from a bachelor's to the PhD, and that is an option most places, okay? Questions on that? Benefits, pros, cons? Okay. All right, so why would you want to get a PhD? Obviously, all you guys are here because you have some inkling that maybe you might want to do this, or at least want to find out more. But why would you be driven to do this, right? It's more school, obviously. So why would you go and do more school? Well, you're passionate about learning. If you're anything like me, I, as a kid, drove my parents crazy because I hated the summers and I wanted to get back to school. You're all probably like, no, that's not me. But if you love school, if you absolutely love learning, right? If you love learning new things, if you never want to stop learning new things, that's a really good reason to go into a research field. If you're passionate about generating new knowledge or answering the questions, things that we don't know yet in the field. The thing that got me to obtain my PhD was sitting in classes, listening to my professors. I realized that the things that they were saying that we didn't know were more interesting to me than the things that we did know. So for me, right, when that professor said, well, you know, we know that listeners with hearing loss really struggle understanding speech and noise. We don't really know the exact mechanisms responsible for that, and we don't really know what we can do to help them. There's not a lot that we can do right now. I thought, that's so cool. I want to find out what I can do to help these people. I want to ask those questions and find those answers. If that's you, if you're really interested in the things that we don't have the answers to, that's a great reason to consider the PhD. And then lastly, if you're passionate about sharing your knowledge and sharing the things that you find out with others, you know, we were just talking about going to conferences. One of my favorite times of year are when I can go to national or international conferences and meet with other researchers who do similar things to what I do and talk with them about the cool things that I've been doing and the cool things they've been doing and share our knowledge, right? I find that to be so much fun. Or going into the classroom to teach my students and being able to say, you know, here's the stuff that the textbook talks about, and here's the stuff that's going on in my lab or someone else's lab that's the cutting edge research that ties into what we're learning. You know, I love sharing that. I hope that my students enjoy it. If they don't, too bad, I'm going to keep doing it. But I really enjoy doing that. You know, so again, if you like sharing, you know, your information and what you're learning with others in terms of teaching, in terms of sharing your research, the PhD is a good option. Lastly, in terms of pursuing, you know, why would you want to pursue a PhD in COMD? And more so, why would you want to pursue it right now? It's a really good time, okay? Unfortunately, for the field, we have a shortage of people with their PhDs in COMD. There are just not enough of us. I can tell you from the audiology side of things, when the audiology degree changed from a master's to a doctorate, so from 2 to 4 years, that really discouraged a lot of people from continuing on to get their PhD, right? Because that's a ton of school. And that's one of the reasons why that dual AUD PhD came into existence. But there's a real shortage of people in the field. So just from a practical standpoint, in terms of being able to get a job once you have your PhD, it's a really good time. All right. Questions on that stuff? Yes?
So for COMD, you have to get a master's and then a PhD. It's not a dual. You can't do a dual.
Are you talking about the SLP, the MA?
Yes.
So her question was, do you have to get the master's in SLP before you get the PhD? And the answer is no, correct?
No.
Yeah, no,
There's some places where you do, some places where you don't, but it's not always required.
that's right.
Okay, even if you want to work clinically.
If you want to work clinically, yes, you do.
Okay.
So is your question, is there like a dual,
Yes.
so can you do them simultaneously? Are they able to
A
do
lot
that
of places where
simultaneously?
you can. So when it said that 41% of speech pathology PhD students start straight from their bachelor's degrees, well then they're doing a dual master's and PhD at the same time.
Right, so if you want to get the clinical degree, you can either do it simultaneously, you could get the clinical degree and then go back. If you don't want to work clinically, like I didn't, then you don't have to do that. But if you do, then yes, you could either do the simultaneous or subsequently to getting your clinical degree. Yes, good question. Other questions on that? Yeah.
So, like professors, they do the research and the teaching side.
Mhm.
So how's that like ratio determined?
Yeah, we're going to actually talk about that here in just a little bit. So his question was, how's the ratio of the teaching and research and all that? How is that determined? We're going to have a whole section on that in here in just a minute. So good question. Yeah.
Just a quick question to go back to
Yeah.
something that I thought about. You guys said that it took you about 7 years to get your PhD.
Yeah.
I know that you guys have like the same coursework. My biggest fear is that y'all are in school for 7 years just taking classes. And
No.
That just seems kind of nerve-wracking.
Not
I had
at
a job
all.
for most of them.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so you guys weren't, okay, you guys were like in your books. I'm like, how many classes did you take?
Not at all. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But no, the coursework is actually a very small proportion of what you do in the PhD program. I mean, you can think of it kind of as an apprenticeship, right? The majority of what I was doing was I was being paid to work as a research assistant, but also learning, about how to do the research. And so, yes, it took me 7 years, but my entire coursework was like 2 years. So, no, very different. Yeah. No, it's very different than just being in school forever. Yeah, it's not like that at all. No, it's much more about learning to do the job, less about, just being in school. Yeah. Okay. So the next thing is, what's the difference between a research PhD and a clinical program, whether that's MA or AUD? So what's the difference between the degrees? So the purpose of the clinical degrees, whether that's the MA in speech pathology or the doctorate in audiology, is to prepare competent clinicians, right? People who go out and work with patients on a daily basis. But in terms of the PhD, the preparation is to become a competent researcher and scholar and teacher so that you can teach future clinicians, so that you can do the research to form the basis of clinical practice, right? So the preparation for these two things is different. In terms of, here, let's go on to the next slide actually. In terms of the PhD, the degree focus is to contribute new knowledge aimed at understanding COMD and solving clinical problems. So you're generating the research questions and you're generating the answers to those questions. In the clinical degree, you're applying existing knowledge. So you're not necessarily doing the original research. You might be taking the research and applying it into your clinical practice. You guys have heard the term like research to practice or evidence-based practice, right? These two things are not independent. They very much go together. But you as a clinician, the clinical training is to apply this knowledge, okay? Aimed at solving clinical problems to benefit your patients. The preparation, in terms of the PhD, is an independent research project. Hopefully more than one, but maybe just one, your dissertation. But you're doing independent research. In the clinical programs, you've obviously got the very structured clinical training that you're doing. You're working with patients under supervision. And you might also do an optional research project, but that's going to be mentored. That's not independent, right? In the AUD here at USU, we do what's called a clinical research project, but you aren't developing that research question yourself. It's provided by your mentor, and they mentor you throughout the entire project, okay? So the preparation is different. And then the career intention, in terms of the PhD, again, is to conduct research and teach future clinicians potentially. And then the career intentions with the clinical degree is clinical practice, direct engagement with patients. Now, I want to make it clear that these two things are not mutually exclusive, right? So if you have a PhD, you can work with patients, okay? Or you can do very clinically oriented research. You don't have to, right? You could do very basic research, but you can work with patients if you want to, especially if you have that clinical training. For the clinical degree, yeah, do you have a question?
What is your guys' opinion on going from like going into a clinical setting to go into a PhD? Because I'm like hoping to be like a professor.
Yeah.
Because I've experienced throughout my college experience having some PhD students as professors that I really have not liked. It seems like they don't have any grasp on like what
the clinical relevance
theory,
of things.
Right. It seems like they only
Sure.
are aware of the theory, but not of like the actual application, and I haven't liked that.
Yeah, so I think we can maybe both talk about this from different perspectives. So I guess it depends on what your research interests and questions are, right? My research questions and interests, while they're tangentially clinically related, right? They're not directly clinical questions. My questions are a little more basic. How does the auditory system work? So do I need the clinical training in order to be able to do that? No. And I can teach anatomy and physiology of the auditory system all day long because that's what I do, right? Whereas somebody who wants to do much more clinically related research, absolutely, I think having that clinical practice gets you to the point where you know what clinical questions you want to ask, right? I mean, I don't...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So most people in speech pathology, except for people in speech science, a lot of people in speech pathology have worked, get a master's degree, do a clinical job for a couple of years, and then go back.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in that
Do you
kind
feel
of boat.
like there's like benefit to that as like a teacher now, as teaching now, versus like if you would have just gone straight through a PhD?
Oh yeah, so I've got lots more stories about the kinds of clients I had and the kinds of experiences I had. And since I teach courses, I teach some clinically oriented courses, so that kind of experience has a relevance for those courses.
Right, right, and I think, you know, and again, it really depends on what you want your career to be, and that's why it's such a personalized thing. So, like, for example, even though I don't have a clinical degree, I went through the audiology program, and I did all of the same things that all the audiology students do, and I got all of the clinical experience because I wanted that. But yet, I didn't go through the extra hoops of getting the clinical degree because I knew I didn't want to work clinically, right? So I was really able to tailor it in a way that allowed me to have the clinical experience and expertise, but yet worked for what I wanted to do. So it's really your choice, but absolutely there are benefits to that if you want to be doing clinically related questions and teaching clinically related courses. Yeah, question. Okay, so anyway, so as I was saying, they're really not mutually exclusive, and that kind of goes along with that question. You can be a clinician and be involved in clinical research. Absolutely, you can do that. There are tons of clinical research centers around the United States where they hire people with a master's in speech pathology or a doctor of audiology, the clinical degree, to be involved in their, say, clinical trials and things like that. So they're not mutually exclusive, but the focus of the training is very different. Okay, and we already touched on this a little bit, but the general components of a PhD program are similar across universities. Now, the specifics of them vary and can vary a lot, but the general components are the same. So typically you have some coursework, and like I said, that's typically about 2 years. For me, even though my program was 7 years, my coursework was only 2. You then do a qualifying examination, and that can vary depending on the place, but it might look at, are your research skills, you know, at a level that we consider you to be an expert, or is your knowledge base at a level that we consider you to be an expert, or some combination of those two. And then you do your dissertation, and the dissertation is an original research study that you design, you execute, and you write up. And the dissertation, again, can look very different depending on what you're doing, but everyone does a dissertation.
Okay, even if you're in clinic.
No, sorry, this is for the PhD. Yes, yes. Okay, so now we've gone through kind of what is a PhD and how do you go about getting one and what does it look like, but then what are the careers? So you don't just get a PhD because you want to go through the program, you get a PhD because you want the job that it gets you to, right? So what are the career options? I would say that the majority of people who get PhDs in COMD especially go into university faculty jobs like what the two of us have. Okay, and you kind of know what that looks like because you're around us, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about what the kind of the breakdown of our job here through the next couple slides. You could also get a job as a research scientist. So a research scientist typically doesn't do any type of teaching or training of students. They're in just a sole research position. So that could be at a university. It could also be at a hospital or an industry. So for example, in audiology, you might work for a hearing aid or a cochlear implant manufacturer and do research for that company. You could be a clinical program administrator, so you could administer a program, and that might also involve some clinical research. You could work for an academic publisher, so some of the journals that we publish in, you could work directly for those publishers. Educational program planning, so you could do things like maybe work for ASHA, being involved in things like developing curriculum and programs for faculty and students in COMD. There's lots and lots of options, and this is not an exclusive, exhaustive list, right? There are tons of other options. These are just kind of the primary places that come to the top of the mind when you think about careers for people with a PhD in COMD. All right, so somebody asked a little bit ago, I think it was you, about what kind of the breakdown of university faculty jobs look like. So first, I just want to say this stat is from I think 2011, and it's just a general statistic across fields. But in 2011, 35% of faculty positions went unfilled. That is not an uncommon statistic, okay? Even though that's a slightly old number at this point, I would venture to guess that that is still very much the case.
2015, 2016 survey, it went down to 25.
Okay,
But
that's still a quarter.
The last few years it stayed between 20. That means they advertised, they tried to hire somebody, and for some reason they couldn't find the person they wanted, or
Right.
there wasn't anybody out there
Right.
that wanted their job, and so a quarter of the positions went
Unfilled. That's a huge issue for COMD, and was the 25% for COMD specific?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Actually, it was for speech pathology.
speech
I don't know
pathology.
about
Okay.
audiology.
Yeah.
It was
So
for speech path.
it's a big deal. It's a big issue. I mean, beyond the fact that we've just got these positions that aren't being filled, what does that mean practically? Well, it means that there aren't enough faculty to teach and train students. Teach and train our future clinicians, that there aren't enough faculty doing the research to get the new information on what are new effective assessments and treatments and to get that research into practice. That means that our clinicians are potentially relying on old information. So this really trickles down, and so this is a huge focus and emphasis of places like ASHA, CAPSID, which is the Council on Academic Programs and Communicative Sciences and Disorders. It's quite the acronym. But these programs are trying to develop things like scholarship funds for people to get their PhDs in COMD because they recognize the need and the issue. So if you are interested, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit more, but if you are interested in getting a PhD and are wondering about funding, know that there are lots of opportunities out there right now because, largely because of this shortage in this issue. Again, as I said before, it also means that when you graduate, the likelihood of you getting a job and getting a good job and one that you want is actually pretty high. In fields like history and English and other fields, that's not the case. There are too many people with their PhDs and not enough faculty jobs. But it's definitely the case in COMD. It's not tough to get a good job and get a job where you want and doing what you want, okay? So just know that in terms of potential job opportunities for you. Okay, so what does it look like? What does being a faculty member look like? Well, one of the best ways to find this out is just to go talk with a faculty member. We love our jobs generally. We are all very, very happy people and are happy to share with you what our day looks like and kind of what we like and don't like about our jobs. But to give you guys a little bit of information more generally, typically our duties and our responsibilities are broken down into three main categories: research, teaching, and service. Okay, and the makeup or the emphasis in each of those categories depends on a lot of things. It might depend on your individual position, it might depend on your department, and it might depend on your university. So in terms of research, most faculty members are expected to do research. Okay, but the degree to which they're expected to do that depends. So for example, at small liberal arts universities, oftentimes the research emphasis is much smaller. Whereas at research intensive universities, so you can think of some of the for me, Big Ten universities, some of the larger universities that have a big emphasis on research, they're going to require their faculty to do more. So that's a bigger part of their kind of role statement or their emphasis. Whereas teaching is kind of similar, and they tend to go back and forth. So if you have more emphasis on research, you tend to have less emphasis on teaching. If you have more emphasis on teaching, you tend to have less emphasis on research. So at some of those smaller liberal arts schools that I talked about, you might have a higher teaching load, and a lower research load. And then it might be the opposite depending on if you're in a larger university. And at some places it's kind of even. A typical teaching load is about what we call 2 and 2. So 2 courses per semester. But again, that varies. It varies even within our department, depending on the person's individual, what we call here, role statements. And then teaching can also include things like supervision of students, so clinical supervision. It might include things like supervising student research, right? So you might think of that as research, but because you're mentoring a student, that actually often falls under teaching, okay? Because you are teaching students how to do research. And then service is something that we are all required to do, and we all happily do, but it's not necessarily a huge part of our job responsibilities. So service can take on a lot of different things, like what we are here doing tonight, talking to you guys, that would be considered service. Things like serving on university committees, or things like doing peer reviews for journals. So when we write a research article and submit it to a journal, the foundation of that is that it goes out for something called peer review, and that other experts in the field take that article, they read it, and they evaluate its science. And they say, yep, this is good, rigorous science, or this doesn't really make sense. Maybe you need to go back to the drawing board and do a couple of things. And that's how we make sure that the best and the most rigorous and the most, just high productivity type of research gets into the journals, all right? That it's not just filled with things that don't really make sense. We serve as those peer reviewers, where we read other people's research and we evaluate it because we're experts in that area. That's scientific service to the field, all right? So service can take on many different things, and it seems daunting, but a lot of it is really fun, right? Getting to read the most, recent upcoming research before others do is good. It's good for your career. It's good for understanding, what's coming out there, and it's just something that we all do. Do you guys have questions about what that looks like or what that means? Service is kind of one of those things that you guys don't see us doing as much, I guess, right? Questions on any of that? Okay. All right, so do I have what it takes to get a PhD? So you are all here, right? So each of you has what it takes. You're all interested in it. Hopefully you're all going to class and learning all of the stuff that you need to learn, but you really need to want it, okay? Like I said, it's an independent program, and you getting through it is largely on you. And so you need to want it, you need to be interested in it, and beyond that, if you're not interested in it, then you're not going to be successful in the career that comes after the degree, right? When I wake up in the morning, most days there's no one telling me what to do, right? There's no boss telling me I need this done by this time, or you really need to make sure you write that journal article and get it in, or you need to make sure that you prep for class before it's too late. No one's telling me that, okay? So it is an independent career. So if you don't love it and you don't really want it, it's probably not for you. But if you do love it, if you do love learning about new things and asking interesting questions and answering them and giving that knowledge to others, then absolutely you have what it takes. But more practically, what do we want from you when you go to apply for a PhD? Well, number one, I would say, is that we want to know that you've seen research, you've done it, and that you still like it. Okay, so we want to make sure that you have some prior research experience, and that could mean volunteering in someone's lab, having some type of research mentoring from a faculty member. We just want to make sure that you have seen the job, that you see what it takes, and that you definitely want to pursue it. We also want to see that you have an explicit interest, and this is where you would write this in your personal statement. What's your research direction going to be? I knew before I started a PhD program that I was interested in something to do with how people with hearing loss understood speech. Now, I didn't have my exact research questions laid out, right? I didn't know what studies I was going to do for my dissertation, but that was okay. I knew what area I wanted to research and who I wanted to do it with. So we want to make sure that you have an area of interest. And so the question before about doing the clinical degree before or getting some clinical exposure, that can help you solidify that, right? Through your clinical program, through the first or second year of your clinical program, or even a couple years of clinical practice, you might start to develop those specific questions. Well, there's this issue that people have and we don't have a good treatment for it, and right? We also want to make sure that you have talked to somebody who will actually mentor you. So remember I said that mentorship relationship is incredibly important. If you apply for a PhD and you want to do something in voice, and you apply to a program that doesn't have a researcher in voice, that's an issue, right? We need to make sure that you've talked to someone, that they are, interested in you, that you're interested in them. It's a mutual thing, okay? So make sure that you've identified someone and you've talked to them. Yeah.
So if we're interested in doing like an AUD PhD
Uh-huh.
combination, what like for applying to grad schools,
Yeah.
do you suggest like looking at their faculty and like trying to figure out what they do in their interests?
Absolutely. So her question was for applying to like a dual AUD PhD program, do you want to make sure that you've looked at the faculty and see that they have someone who does your interest? Absolutely. So if you want to do the dual degree, or even if you just want to apply for the PhD, you want to make sure that you've identified someone on that faculty who does what you want to do. And it doesn't have to be exact, right? Like it doesn't have to be, well, my question is specifically swallowing for 3 to 6 month old infants. It doesn't have to be that they do that, right? But they at least do swallowing, okay? And that you have talked to them about it, right? You want to make sure that you reach out to them and that you've had a discussion about, can they take you on, right? Maybe they have 3 PhD students and don't have the time to take you on, or don't have the funding, or whatever. So you want to make sure you've had that conversation. Yeah.
I just had the same question for SLP. So if I'm still planning on getting like clinical experience, should I still be looking for a master's program that has research on specific interests, or should I just be looking for a master's program?
I would suggest looking for a master's program where there are people there that are well known and they're doing things that you care about, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You want to study with experts, whether
Yeah.
you're doing it as a master's degree student or a PhD student.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, how do we as like undergraduate students know that like this person will probably be a good mentor, or this person will help me get to where I want to go? Because I
Yeah.
have like no idea.
Yeah, that is tough. You're right. So I would say one of the best ways is first just go to their websites, right? A lot of people, especially now, I'd say most people who have active labs have lab websites. And we try really hard to keep them updated. We don't always. And that includes sometimes current or past students. So I wouldn't say it's out of the realm of possibility to contact their current or past students. I think that's probably smart. I think you'll learn a lot just from talking to them. So setting up a Skype meeting, right? Even if you can't travel there. If it's just the kind of beginnings, kind of filling them out, setting up a Skype meeting. And make sure when you do that you've read their research, okay? I don't want you to contact me and say, oh, I really want to work with you. And I'll say, oh, okay, why? Well, I'm really interested in the cognitive processes of blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, that's not what I do, right? Obviously, you didn't quite read my research papers. So I want to make sure that the person has read what I do and that they're still interested in it, and that's really what they're interested in, right? So just having a conversation with them, I think, can give you a lot of insight. If you're able to visit, I think a lot of people will require you to visit before they'll take you on as a student. And that can give you a ton of insight into their lab environment. If you want to meet their students and see, are they really unhappy and beaten down? Things like that. You can get a feeling for that if you go visit. Yeah.
And ASHA has a website where they list all the PhD programs and lots of information about each one.
Yeah.
How many students they have, how many years each student, what their average number of years to completion is, what percentage of their students get there. Now it's going to vary a little bit from mentor to mentor at that institution, but at least you're going to get a sense for what's going on in that department.
Is that on EdFind or is that something else?
I think that's on EdFind.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, good, really good questions. And then the last thing in terms of applying is you want strong letters of recommendation. Ideally, if you can get a letter of recommendation from someone you've actually done research with, that's the strongest in my opinion, right? Because you might be a great student, but if you don't work well in a research lab, we need to know that information. So getting a letter of recommendation from someone who can attest to your scholarly abilities is really important. And like I said, getting through this is really based on your personal drive, your perseverance. The clinical programs are really structured. You're with a cohort of students, you're doing a certain number of clinical hours, certain classes. It's very different for the PhD. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about applying, and when you're talking to these potential mentors, kind of what it's going to look like and how much guidance are they going to give you. Having a strong mentor can be the difference between completing a program and not, right? Because so much of it, you don't typically always have a really strong cohort of students that you're going through it with, because everyone's program is so different. So having a mentor who's really going to help you and make sure that you get done, that, in my opinion, is golden. It's very important. Okay, so before we switch to what the programs specific to Utah State are, anyone have any last questions on kind of these general things that we've gone through? All right, so let's talk about the stuff at USU. So I'm going to talk really briefly about the audiology side of things, and then we'll switch over to the speech pathology side of things. So there are two main tracks here at USU, and we'll talk more about these in a minute. But one is the Disability Disciplines doctoral program, and there are specializations in both audiology and speech pathology, and I'm going to talk about the audiology specialization. And then there's the neuroscience track. So which track you go into kind of depends on what your area of interest is. But we have I think both of these are now active in our things here. Yep. Great. So in terms of the disabilities doctoral program, so it's multidisciplinary. So that means that you're going to be working with students and faculty from different programs. And the students that you're going through the PhD program with might be from counseling or rehab, kinesiology, different related programs. And so you're going to get a much more well-rounded experience, and I think that's really unique to USU and really important and a really good part of what we have here. And there are lots of specializations, including SLP and audiology. So in terms of the audiology specialization, there are 3 possible faculty members. So these are the mentors that you could have here at USU. Dr. Karen Munoz, she is our interim department head now. Her area of research is in audiology counseling. She also does a lot of research in audiology program-specific things, so training AUD students, developing curriculum in the audiology program. And then Dr. Barker, she was the one who put together these slides, so everyone should thank her. I mostly should thank her. She does language processing from more of a cochlear implant and pediatric focus. She does work some with adults, and she does work some with different populations, but that's her main focus, is cochlear implants and pediatrics. And then I kind of do something similar, so I'm in speech perception, but I approach it from a hearing loss and adult focus. So Dr. Barker and I actually work really closely together. We joke that if one of us has a PhD student, we both have a PhD student because our labs work so closely together. But both of us it's interesting here at USU, we have 2 people on the audiology faculty who approach things from a speech perspective. So if you're interested in both speech and hearing like I was, we could be potentially good mentors for that, because both of us kind of have both an audiology and also a little bit of a speech background, because what we do is speech perception and speech processing. There are 3 kind of roads to getting your PhD in audiology. These go along with what we talked about before, where you can go straight from the bachelor's. We do have that option here at USU. You can come back after you've gotten your AUD. I would say that's less common here, but you absolutely can. And then the most common option is to do the AUD PhD simultaneously. And the way that works here is you would apply for the AUD program, and then you would get in. And the good thing about our AUD program is from day 1, we start every AUD student doing that clinical research project. So you start doing research immediately, whether you want to or not. And that's a really good way to learn if the PhD is right for you, because if you love it, then great. And if you don't, then maybe that's an indication that it's not for you. And then after you've done a year or 2 of the AUD, then you apply for the PhD, and you do them both concurrently. And it's roughly a 5-year program here. But again, of course, that depends on you. The audiology specialization within the disability disciplines is a total of 60 credits. You do those interdisciplinary core courses where you're taking courses with the other students from, counseling, kinesiology, the different programs. And then you also do your audiology specialization, so you'd be doing the audiology coursework. Everyone who goes through this program, regardless of if it's audiology or not, does these series of products. And these, I think, are a really wonderful part of the program here at USU because it means that you get at least exposed to everything that you'll do in your career as a faculty member, okay, or a researcher. You do research, you do a presentation, you teach, you do a lit review, you write a grant. That's something that a lot of people don't get experience with in their PhD program, but that you absolutely have to do in your career. Supervision, and you at least get one publication, right? And then, of course, the dissertation. That's the cornerstone of the program. All right.
Okay. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the speech pathology. And it's basically set up the same, similarly to the audiology one. So the faculty members in speech language pathology, Stephanie Bory does motor speech disorders. I do language science. My wife does child language disorders in general. Stephanie Nolhoff does dysphagia, voice disorders. Lisa Millman does neurogenic disorders, and Teresa Ukrainitz also does child language disorders. So those are possible mentors here. The requirements. So there's these 19 credits. Oh, here we have a 61 credit requirement. There's 19 credits that are called core courses, and I'll show you what they are in just a minute. Then there's 21 credits in the specialization area. So these are courses. Then there's a preliminary exam you take after being in the program for 1 year. Do a preliminary exam where you write 3 questions, and then that just kind of demonstrates that you've learned enough in year 1 to kind of go on. It's kind of a way for some students to say, I've had enough, or faculty to say, you've had enough. We've all had enough. So that has happened one time since I've been here. Then the 8 credits, you get 1 credit for each of the products that we just talked about, and then there's 12 credits of dissertation. In terms of the coursework, it's like research design and statistics. There's this pro seminar where they talk about just basic issues in education and research. There's an evidence-based practice course. There's a journal reading. There are a bunch of journal reading group courses that people can take. There's social and legal issues or educational neuroscience. There's a multicultural issues and disability. And whether you're in audiology or speech pathology, the core courses are the same. So or in special ed, or in applied behavior analysis, or in disability studies, or kinesiology, whatever area you're in, you take these same core courses. And then you take your specialization courses, and there are things like advanced topics or research seminars or special topics or other courses in research methods and statistics. And so you add up a whole bunch of these specialization courses till you get to 21 hours. Okay. It turns out we just got a leadership grant from the U.S. Department of Education to train doctoral students in evidence-based practice and implementation science. So there'll be 6 doctoral students who are funded on that. They will take some courses. There will be some special courses. They'll do some internships with the Utah, I always forget the name, but it's a network where experts go out and teach speech pathologists and classroom teachers all about the latest research findings. So we pay you to do that. You get $20,000 a year to be a research assistant. You get a tuition waiver. You don't pay tuition or fees. You get a computer, and we pay students to go to conferences. So this is kind of a standard funding package for doctoral students. I've heard of some packages that are a little higher, like some places they pay their doc students $25,000, but I've heard of a lot of places where they don't pay them as much. A lot of places will be $12,000, $15,000.
So the cost of living here is good.
And the
whereas
cost,
you might be in San Francisco getting $25,000.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Yes.
right.
It matters.
Okay, so in this new program, there's a whole track on research methods. There's a whole track that deals with evidence-based practices and a track that deals with implementation sciences. So we have added some courses to get this grant. So there'll still be 61 credits, total credits, but the courses, there'll be some specialized courses in evidence-based practice and implementation science, and some specialized internship experiences that other doctoral students wouldn't have.
Can our audiology students take the implementation science courses?
I think they can.
Okay, that's awesome.
I don't know why they couldn't.
All right.
Okay. Now I'm going to jump. Are there any questions about that? So there's a general disability disciplines doctoral degree in speech pathology. Then inside of that, there's this specialized track where people will do evidence-based practice and implementation science. In this case, these students, I think the vast majority of them will come with master's degrees, because that lets them jump into the evidence-based practice stuff and the implementation science stuff, which is all clinically based research. Now at USU, there's another program that people in communicative disorders can get involved in, and it's the interdisciplinary doctoral program in neuroscience, and I'm the head of that. So in neuroscience, we're talking about molecular biology, neurobiology, integrative neuroscience, brain imaging, rehab, and we do have biology students in this program. There are biology students, psychology students, some speech pathology students also have signed up here. So I'm just going to kind of jump ahead here and not spend much time on that one. So in speech pathology, our students are engaged primarily in cognitive neuroscience and behavioral neuroscience. The biology students are mostly in cellular neuroscience.
Audiology students as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's the faculty come from psychology, COMD, hyper, family studies and human development, and biology. So there's faculty in all of these areas. Students pick a focus area. So there are 3 focus areas that you can choose from: translational neuroscience, educational neuroscience, and lifespan neuroscience. The SLP students that are in the neuroscience program are either doing educational or lifespan. But I can imagine somebody who's kind of into cellular stuff and likes biology could do the translational neuroscience. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep, for sure. Okay. Curriculum, this is a 64 credit total. So there's 28 credits in the core, and there are 9 credits in electives, 15 credits in whatever focus area you choose, and then 12 dissertation credits. A big difference between the disability disciplines degree and the neuroscience degree is there's not a master's degree here. This is 64 credits from bachelor's to PhD. There is no master's degree. So that's kind of interesting. We've got, we've probably got 11 doctoral students in the neuroscience program. There are 5 speech pathology doctoral students in the disability disciplines program and 4 audiology doctoral students in that. So students kind of spread out in terms of the different kind of programs that they're involved in.
On the educational side of this PhD program, like how are you looking at brain scans to look at like language and literacy development? Is that like, I think you work with like FNIRS or something?
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
So there are people doing that. There's people doing EEG work, people doing eye tracking kinds of things. So they're mostly imaging types of experiences in the educational and in the lifespan areas.
Questions on these programs? Questions generally for us? Anything you ever wanted to know about getting a PhD or our jobs or anything else? Yeah.
So when you guys said it took you like 7 years and you were working.
They're stuck on that. Yes.
No.
Sorry, I didn't know she took 7. She didn't know I did. It was just a fluke. Most people don't.
Well, I don't think there's a problem with that. I was just curious because I'm looking up different programs and they're like only accepting full-time students. So can you still be a full-time student and work somewhere else, not at the university? As a research assistant?
I think that really depends on the place. I know some places discourage that only because it is such an intensive program. And I'm going to be honest, whereas he said he was working, I took 7 years and I was not working another job. So you know, in terms of being able to get the degree and get finished and be able to focus on it as much as possible, I think a lot of places highly encourage or require you to be a full-time student. Now, that's not to say that's the case everywhere, and that's not to say that, you know, you couldn't work out something with your mentor where you know, worked a lot, especially I think in speech pathology where a lot of people get the degree and come back. Some people, like the person who got her degree with me, we were in the same lab. She was a speech pathologist who had gone back, even though technically the rule was that you have to be a full-time student. She was doing PRN work, you know, and things like that. So, yeah.
So the doc students here, I don't think any of the current PhD students have outside jobs, but I've had a few doctoral students here who did PRN stuff in the valley just as extra income, and they worked it out. In my case, I was a full-time student for a 2-year period of time. Then my wife had our first child, so we needed for me to make some money. And so I worked as a speech pathologist for a while. And then I went out and took a job as a faculty member that when I was what's called ABD, all but dissertation. I'd completed everything. I'd collected my dissertation data. And then I went and got a job as a professor. So I did that for about a year before I actually finished my dissertation. Finally, they said, you either finish or you can't work here anymore. So I finished.
Yeah.
So especially in like the COMD thing here, we have a bunch of like instructors
Yes.
that we have as teachers and things.
Yes.
So it seems like you guys are all one big happy family. So is there like
I like that
what is
I
your-
like that
what
that's
is
the.
your-
That's a good perception to have.
Yes, it is.
These guys put on a good show. So what is your guys' relation with like the instructors, and what is the difference between them? Is it the research side that's differing, or I guess what's the difference between?
Yeah. Do you want to take that? You've been here a little
So-
longer than I have.
So you mean the people in the clinic? And we also have master's level people who teach classes here.
So
Right.
that's kind of what
Okay.
I'm referring to
Yeah.
is the lecturers and
Yeah.
the,
Uh-huh.
and that.
Right. So they don't do research and they don't have a research requirement at all. And in most cases, those courses have been developed with a PhD person that's been involved, and then the master's people take it over, but that's not always the case. This department is somewhat unusual in that we have probably more people with master's degrees teaching courses than a lot of other departments have.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of the practical difference in terms of the job, one thing we didn't talk about was the tenure track, right? So when you get hired on as a faculty member with your PhD, typically the position is tenure track, which means that you are required to do whatever you're required to do, whether that's research, teaching, whatever the combination is, to continue on and to stay in the position. In a position like that where it's a master's or a lecturer position, you know, that research thing is not a component, and typically they're not a tenure track position. So practically that's the difference.
So the tenure thing, you have a 5-year period to do enough research to demonstrate and to teach well enough to demonstrate to the university that they want to kind of keep you on for a long time.
Right.
So at the end of that 5-year period, people evaluate your research credentials and your teaching credentials, and then you're up or out. Basically, they decide, yes, you can stay here, and you're promoted from assistant professor to associate professor.
Or bye-bye.
Or, sorry, you didn't do enough here. You didn't do it well enough, and so you need to go somewhere else.
I can tell you as someone who is pre-tenure, that's not pressure at all.
Yeah, it's a pretty pressure-packed kind of time. So in terms, we all like our jobs, we like what we do.
I love my
But
job.
there is a publish or perish thing in a research university.
Yes.
So,
And it depends to some degree on where you go. If you're at a super kind of high pressure, you know, research intensive university, that can be even more pressure, you know, whereas a place that's maybe a little smaller might, the atmosphere might be a little bit different, right? You still have to publish or you perish, but, you know, the pressure cooker nature of it, you know, can be a little bit different. So depending on your personality and kind of where you want to work and what kind of environment, you can really make those choices. You know, once you get the PhD, what kind of position you want. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Is the research assistant position, is that for a certain amount of time, or is that for the entire time it takes you to get your PhD? Is it
Are you talking
the
about
first 2 years?
the specific one that is an option here, or are you talking about generally?
In general.
In general, so typically, it depends on funding. A lot of things in what we do depend on funding. When you get a research assistant position, typically it's for a set period of time, and if you end up taking more than that, that kind of can sometimes be on you. But like I said, there's a lot of options. So like for example, because I took 7 years, my funding ran out, surprise, surprise. And so I was able to apply for a program through CAPSID, that Council on Academic Program in Communicative Sciences and Disorders, and get funding for my dissertation. So I was able to get funded through that. So there are lots and lots of options for funding. You just have to sometimes get a little bit creative with it. But like I said, because there's a shortage of PhDs in our field and because there's a real investment in that right now, there are plenty of options. Yeah.
So typically you get a 4-year period. And the research assistants are typically 20 a half-time. It's like a half-time job.
Yeah.
So you take your classes, then you work in with your mentor in their lab for about 20 hours a week, and then toward the latter part of that, you start doing your own kind of stuff.
Right.
Too.
Right. Yeah.
One other thing that's not like, typically the doctoral students take 6 or 9 credits a semester. So they take fewer credits. That's mainly because there's more expectation. The courses are, I don't know, I don't think they were as hard because the tests aren't the same.
Right, it's
you
more
write
about
papers, you sit and talk.
You discuss. The classes are very different. I think that's something that can be really intimidating to students is, oh my gosh, that's more school, right? But no, it's really different. It's not like undergrad, and it's not even like the clinical program where, yeah, you're right, where you have all those exams and such. It's much more about being collegial and scholarly and learning the material because you need to know it, right? And so the coursework is different. It's much more about, you know, learning the topics and discussing the topics and thinking deeply about the topics. And what you're doing on a daily basis is less about coursework. It's less about homework. It's really not about that at all. It's much more about learning the skills in the lab or learning the skills in, you know, a mentored teaching thing or something like that. So you're right, that is different. Yeah. So let that be a little bit of a comfort. I always say that the PhD for me was like an extended internship, right? Or an extended apprenticeship where I was mostly getting paid to do it, you know? So it's don't let the money or the idea that it's extra school dissuade you, because it's not really like that. It's different. Yeah. All right. Any last questions? Thanks, you guys, for being here. I really
guys.
appreciate it.